Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Let's talk about it. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is of course directed by none other than James Gunn, who directed the other two Guardians of the Galaxy movies as well as writing them. And here we essentially have the Guardians' swan song, at least the Guardians team that we've come to know and love, because this is the final entry into the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy and the final project that James Gunn worked on before heading over to be the co-head of the DCU. And boy, let me tell you, after watching this film, that man will be missed. That man will be missed in the MCU because god damn it, this film was just brilliant. It was actually perfect. Well, at least it was a perfect swan song to the Guardian story. I loved this film, truly. I will say up front, I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. So we are going to be diving into my thoughts, feelings, what I liked, what I didn't like on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. But as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Okay guys, without further ado, let's get into this. So the last time that we saw the Guardians of the Galaxy was actually in their holiday special, which I also reviewed, and there it was established that they are currently running nowhere, which is essentially a planet that is made up of the floating head of a deceased celestial. So they have taken control of it and they are kind of renovating it, you know, cleaning it up a little bit, and it seems like they've established a really cool society over there. Now the holiday special was like a cute little entry into the Guardian story. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun and harmless, but it had some really wonderful like moments of depth, and it also made me really appreciate this amazing team that I'm going to miss so much. Guys, I cannot tell you how much I'm gonna miss the Guardians. I didn't appreciate them when I had them, and now that they're gone, I'm just beside myself. What am I gonna do? I was crying so much during this film, but we'll talk about it in a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. So like I said, after the holiday special established that these guys have been working together to run nowhere, and it also established that Mantis is Peter's half sister. Those are the kind of key points that we got from that holiday special, in case you didn't watch it, although you really should if you haven't. So jumping off of that, we start off Volume 3 back in nowhere, where we see the gang running things, but Peter is still in a really depressed state because of his lost love, Gamora. You know, during the Infinity Wars saga, we saw Gamora get killed by her dad, okay, sacrificed in the altar of the Soul Stone by her father. And she didn't make it back because she wasn't, you know, killed by the snappening, and so she's gone for good. And the Gamora that they have now is from an alternative timeline, and she doesn't remember any of the adventures or the love story that she had with Peter, and so he's still feeling really depressed. He was depressed in the holiday special as well, but he kind of cheered up a little bit because of the lovely gesture that Mantis and co made for him. But clearly that wasn't enough to brighten his mood permanently, because he's back on the drink. He's back on the drink, okay, and he's not feeling great about himself when we meet him at the beginning of Volume 3. But very early on, Peter is forced to snap out of his bad mood because all of a sudden nowhere is attacked by Adam Warlock. Now we got a hint of Adam Warlock at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, where we saw Elizabeth Debicki's Aisha, who's part of the Sovereign, create him in this cocoon. But then we're suddenly quickly introduced to him at the beginning of Volume 3, where it turns out he's on a mission to retrieve Rocket for the High Evolutionary. Now, Adam Warlock isn't able to kidnap Rocket, but he does injure him severely, leading to Rocket needing a medipack, except the team can't use a medipack on him because it turns out he has a kill switch somewhere in his body that was put in place by the High Evolutionary because he considered him to be his intellectual property. And that's the kind of premise that we get that sets up the exploration of Rocket's backstory, which we get in successive flashbacks that are just so heartbreaking and disturbed. Oh my god, so heartbreaking, guys. Oh man. But the main mission for the group group then is to figure out a way to destroy this kill switch or counteract it somehow so that Rocket can be saved by a medipack, and time is ticking because he's on the verge of dying within 48 hours. And so of course, because they're the Guardians of the Galaxy, because they're this beautiful found family that we've all come to know and love, they travel across the cosmos to find a solution for their friend. They figure out where the High Evolutionary's labs are, the different bases. It takes them to a planet that he has been curating, the kind of summation of all of his experimentations and horrible scientific, quasi-scientific practices, and he names this planet Counter Earth, and that was the sort of cul-de-sac planet that we saw in some of the trailers for the film. The team is sent on a whole cosmos-wide journey in order to find a way to save their friend. And then later on in the film, when they are eventually able to find the key that will kill the kill switch so that Rocket can be saved, they team up together once again in order to save the other subjects of the High Evolutionary's experiments who are stuck in his ship, and they blow the whole thing up, just as he blew up his own counter-Earth planet that he came up with because he was eternally dissatisfied with any imperfections. The team end up saving a bunch of children as well as a bunch of animals, and they take them all to nowhere, which has become newly populated with a bunch of kids and a bunch of animals. And then you have this really heartbreaking, bittersweet ending where some of the members of the team go their separate ways because they want to start new chapters in their lives. And you have, Peter Quill deciding to go back on Earth and, connect with the only living family member that he knows of. Gamora decides to head back with the Ravagers because they've become her family now. And Mantis decides to go on her own path because ever since being controlled by Ego and then becoming a part of the Guardians, she hasn't really been able to explore what she wants to do with her own life. And so she's gone off to do that. And so you have a few of the Guardians remaining. Nebula is running things on nowhere, but Rocket ends up taking the position as the team leader for this new version of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And who knows when we'll see the next journey that they go on. But like I said, this was just such a beautiful and bittersweet ending to an incredible series of stories for one of my very favorite teams that I've ever seen on the big screen. So now that I've gone through the premise, now that I've gone through the story, I mean, honestly, this is a tricky one because I don't even know what to say other than this film was good. Like, this film, honestly, it was just exceptional. James Gunn knocked it out of the damn park. And I guess that's where I'll start here, because obviously he had quite the roller coaster ride over at Marvel, but even from the jump with the first Guardians of the Galaxy film, he proved to all of us, to the world, that he could take an unknown group of misfits, literally, like, if you want to call Iron Man a B-list character from the Marvel comics, then what are the Guardians? What, C-list, D-list? Like, literally no one knew who the Guardians were. Absolutely no one. And it should not have worked, but he took these misfit characters and made them huge and made them some of our favorite characters in all of the MCU. He did that through his writing, through his exceptional casting, through his world building. He managed to do that so well. And honestly, I don't think he's necessarily been able to replicate that success since then, because whilst I really enjoyed the Suicide Squad, I thought Peacemaker was a little bit wobbly. For me personally, I know it has its fans, but I thought Peacemaker was like, it wasn't quite to the level of the Guardians. It didn't feel quite as natural. So even for his own resume, this is a huge success story. But aside from James Gunn's resume, when it comes to the Marvel franchise, I think it's also a huge success story because he has essentially given them the best trilogy in the entire franchise. Like, literally, I was thinking about it. I was like, who else has a better trilogy than this? No one. Before this film came out, I confidently said that the Captain America trilogy was the best trilogy in the entire MCU, and that was correct. Okay, don't get it twisted, because I have always really enjoyed the first Captain America movie, and of course Captain America Winter Soldier is one of the best comic book movies ever made, period, like regardless of MCU, DC, whatever. And then you have Civil War, which is also exceptional. So the Captain America trilogy was like solid, and still is. But what James Gunn has done is create a trilogy that is solely focused on the Guardians, that feels a little bit more insulated. He's really protected his characters and given them storylines and character arcs that have evolved throughout the trilogy itself. Like, you can watch all three of these films on their own without having seen any of the rest of the MCU, kind of, and you'll be, you know, fully on board with these characters and with their adventures. And I say kind of because there is of course an exception to that. You know, when we dove into the Infinity Wars saga, where the Guardians played a role in especially Infinity War, and we saw what happened to Gamora at the hand of Thanos, and you know, James Gunn did say in several interviews that he felt like he had very little control over the characters during that period, because there was already a storyline written for them that had already been defined without his sort of input, and that didn't necessarily gel with what he had envisioned for his characters, essentially. So there was a bit of abrasiveness, you know, a bit of friction there, but I think he does such a great job in volume 3 of like bringing these characters back, taking them back into his control, and you know, realigning the storylines that we became invested in ever since the first Guardians movie. And so on top of the fact that each of these films have been consistently excellent, the flow of these storylines is another reason why I think it is the superior Marvel trilogy. Because when you look at the Captain America trilogy, even though, you know, the worst of the films are like very good and the best is like exceptional, there are still some really big gaps in storytelling and character development that you can't really get an understanding of unless you've watched other films around it within the MCU. Whereas in the case of the Guardians, I think you could absolutely watch Guardians 1, 2 and 3 in succession and get a pretty whole understanding of the Guardians' journey. Again, with the exception of the whole Gamora situation. So I guess like if you watched Infinity War at least, and Endgame and the second half of Endgame, then you would have a full understanding of the Guardian story. But I'll tell you what you don't need to watch. I'll tell you what you don't need to watch to understand the Guardians. You do not need to watch Thor: Love and Thunder. You do not need to watch Thor: Love and Thunder, because I said in my review of that film that the Guardians felt so off. Like, it felt like Taika Waititi just did not understand the vibe, the essence of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Even if James Gunn was a consultant on that or whatever, like, it just was not there. But here, you know, when he's fully in control of these characters that he clearly loves and cares about, he absolutely knocks it out of the park, whether it be in volume 3 or in the holiday special. And another thing that I really came to appreciate about James Gunn's direction of the Guardians franchise, I mean, this has kind of turned into a James Gunn love fest. Like, I don't love the guy, don't get me wrong, okay? I still think his tweets were horrible and disgusting, and he's very problematic. But what I appreciate about what he brought to the table is his like unique vision and his unique like sensibilities. And I often talk about this when it comes to especially the recent Marvel projects and how some of these directors have felt, you know, visionless or directionless. Most of them haven't really had their own artistic quality or vision to inject into their projects, and so they feel very bland and like they could have been made by anyone, Peyton Reed. But I've always used directors like Ryan Coogler and James Gunn as examples of directors who had a very clear artistic vision and were able to convey that in their work, and James Gunn was able to do so 3 times in a row successfully. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 has all of the James Gunn isms that we've come to know and love. The great taste in music, for one, the fact that they had the callback to the songs from the first Guardians movie. At that point, I was crying. At that point, I was sobbing. Literally, guys, you have no idea. I cried more during this film than I did during Endgame. Like, it was a wrap, okay? But yeah, he had callbacks to the first Guardians movie, but the songs in this film were also great, and they were also more obscure. Like, he was really testing himself. Like, he really wanted to go out there. Him and his music supervisor were like, let's do something different here. Let's shake it up. And music has always been a really big theme in the Guardians franchise. You know, Peter obviously had his little Walkman, was it? That was one of the few souvenirs that he had from Earth. And then later on, it became the Zoom something. I don't know what these things are, but it was kind of like an iPod, but not the predecessor to the iPod, which gave him even more songs. And Yondu was the one that gave that to him, and so that was his like treasured possession, and that was what he was using from volume 2 to 3. And then he imparts that onto Rocket, you know, when he leaves back for Earth again. And Rocket, oh my god, at the end, when Rocket is like going through the songs and he chooses a song from the 2000s because it signifies how he's moving forward into the future, whereas Peter was stuck in the past. Oh my, mwah. And then the song in question is The Dog Days Are Over, and it's like, oh, if I thought I was crying before. Another James Gunn staple that really shone in this movie was the comedy and the quick, quippy dialogue. A lot of these other Marvel directors and writers have tried to replicate the signature Marvel quip style and comedy style with mixed success. Some directors were really good at it, like the Russo bros and of course Jon Favreau, who kind of set the tone for everyone. But others, Peyton Reed, had mixed success, especially, you know, most recently. Taika Waititi also did a really great job with that kind of tone and comedy, kind of amped that up a little bit, especially for the Thor franchise. So we've had mixed results across the board, is my point. But I think James Gunn has remained really consistent when it comes to the dialogue and the tone and the comedic qualities of these films. The jokes tend to land, the dialogue feels natural to each of these characters, and it's just very well written. Like, it's just very well written in a time when writing is a big topic, okay? In a time when, you know, even before the writer's strike and everything, I was talking about how these films just felt so poorly written. It was so refreshing to see a film that had a good script, or it was so refreshing to see a film that looked like it had been, you know, drafted and redrafted and had love and heart and soul poured into it. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so that's my ode to James Gunn done. Okay, but you know, going back to the fact that this film was so well written, you know, as I mentioned, music has always been a motif within the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, but there were also some really compelling themes in this film, you know, particularly one of the most prominent ones being animal welfare. If you're an animal lover, this is gonna be a tricky watch for you, I predict, because listen, I'm an animal lover, but like, I'm not like a vegan or vegetarian or anything like that. Like, I'm not die hard like that. But some of these scenes were incredibly upsetting to me. Oh, like I said, sobbing, crying, raining down my face. This was a really hard watch. So fair warning, if you haven't seen it yet and you're an animal lover and you're sensitive to, you know, animal abuse, just know it's going to be tricky to get through. But I would say hands down that the exploration of Rocket's backstory was one of the best superhero origin stories that we have gotten ever, actually. Ever. Okay, we do see, you know, Rocket as a baby, as is alluded to in the trailers, where he was, you know, taken by the High Evolutionary and cruelly cruelly experimented on. He had parts of him missing and metallic parts kind of, you know, put into him. It's so sad to see. Like, honestly, I don't even want to think about it. It was so upsetting, guys. And I was surprised at how far this film took it. You know, I thought after the initial scene of seeing Rocket be experimented on, we were gonna back away a little bit. But no, it just got worse and worse and worse. And you also get introduced to some of Rocket's friends, like Lila, the otter, who we see in the trailers, whose story is so tragic and so freaking sad. I was just so sad to see her with those like metallic robot arms. Oh my god. Ooh. You're also introduced to Teefs and Floor. Floor in particular was also really hard to look at because like she's a bunny with like the sting around her mouth and these spider legs. We'll move on from this topic because I'm literally beside myself right now. But yeah, I think it's safe to say that this film takes a clear, strong stance against animal cruelty, against animal experimentation. I think the message is very strong and very effective there. And again, it was surprising in a Guardians of the Galaxy film. This franchise has, you know, touched on really heartbreaking topics, you know, like Peter Quill's mother having cancer and Ego just being the worst entity in the entire universe. But here in this film, when you see the flashbacks of Rocket being experimented on, learning how to speak and becoming friends with the other animals, basically, the flashback sequences were really intense and really, really upsetting, far more than I ever would have anticipated. I came into this film knowing that it was going to be sad, but I didn't realize it was going to be that sad. So to see that James Gunn like fully went there with this theme and with this exploration of this beloved character was truly admirable, and it really did shock and surprise me, and I just feel like it was done really, really well, and with a clear message of, you know, being against animal cruelty, which I can absolutely support. Alongside James Gunn's excellent directing and incredible writing, another person that really sold the gravity of this tragic storyline is none other than the High Evolutionary himself, who was exceptionally portrayed by Chukwudi Iwuji. Apologies if I mispronounced his name, but I would say that he did such an exceptional job in this role. I remember him from Peacemaker as well, where he was really good, but here, like, he was just on a completely different level for me. And I would call him the worst / best MCU villain that we have ever gotten. Oh, oh, sorry. Ooh, Thanos fans, sorry about it. And listen, me personally, I've never thought that Thanos was the best villain that the MCU has ever had. I had issues with his, you know, reasoning and his plans and a lot of this stuff. It was one of my early videos that I posted, you know, all of the issues that I had with Infinity War. But for me, Eric Killmonger has always been the best villain that the MCU has produced because of the complexity of the character, because of how relatable he is. I just feel like there was more there as a villain, and then you have characters like Loki as well, when he was an actual villain and not, you know, an anti-hero. But yeah, either way, Thanos, you know, was in the top 3, but he was never my favorite villain. But along came the High Evolutionary, who also isn't my favorite villain, but he's certainly the cruelest. Like, this is a classic bad guy. There's no nuance here. There's no grey area. There's no middle ground. No. Like with Eric Killmonger, you're like, oh, he's kind of right, but his methods are crazy and blah, blah. In the case of the High Evolutionary, he is just evil. He is just the devil incarnate. That's it. Like, there's no two ways about it. And honestly, I love that, because if you watched my Everything Wrong with Phase 4 of the MCU video, you will know that one of my fixes, one of my solutions for the MCU was to get a good quality villain. And I was thinking it would be Kang, but that's looking a bit rocky right now. So here comes the High Evolutionary all of a sudden just stealing everyone's thunder. he was the worst. He was literally the worst. His obsession with perfection, his obsession with, you know, evolution and, you know, not being satisfied with what is, and just treating living beings like inanimate objects that literally meant nothing to him. I honestly, like, I hated him, but I love the fact that James Gunn just said, F it, let's just create the worst character that the MCU has ever seen, because this is exactly what I personally needed as a fan. Like, I was tired of the nuance. I was tired of the poorly executed villains. This guy right here just gave us exactly what we asked for. And again, I have to emphasize, this was in large part because of, you know, James Gunn's directing, writing and everything, but also Quill was just so good. He was so good. And I remember watching the trailers for Guardians 3 and for Quantumania and saying like, oh, you know, the High Evolutionary and Kang look too similar aesthetically because they're both black men in purple. But after having seen this film, I have to say, in that competition of evilness, from what we've seen so far, the High Evolutionary has already won. He has already, like, he is, I don't even know if there's anything Kang could do to surpass him. Any variant of Kang that we may see in the future. Like, I don't think there's much that Kang could possibly do to look worse than the High Evolutionary, because this guy is literal garbage. And I did recently read that, you know, this was James Gunn's intention. He just wanted to create a character who was just cruel and evil. And, you know, he's had some pretty good villains, you know, in the past, especially Ego in Volume 2. Again, cruel, evil. Like, there's no nuance to Ego. He's just a terrible entity, a godlike being who has way too much power and no empathy for living creatures. Like, he sucks. Okay, Ego sucks. We all know that scene where he's like, oh, it's a shame I had to give your mum cancer. Like, I feel like Kurt Russell just like nailed that scene. Yeah, so he's already in the trash, but there's something about the High Evolutionary and his disregard for living beings, and, you know, obviously particularly animals and children who we all have a natural empathy towards, that was just like, yeah, nah. Okay, so now we're gonna go through my thoughts on each of the Guardians' storylines in this movie. We're just gonna do a quick rundown of each of the characters, but I have to say, you know, another great aspect of this script is that James Gunn pays careful attention to every single one of these Guardians. Even though Rocket is clearly the focus in this movie, each of the films have focused on a member of the Guardians team, and it's Rocket's turn this time around, but we still get some great character development and great character exploration for the rest of the Guardians team as well. So first up, we have the man of the hour, or shall we say the raccoon of the hour. And I've basically already talked about his backstory, and that was quite upsetting for me. But when it comes to his role in the present day, the fact that he does ascend to become the team leader, and, you know, the fact that he accepts that he is a raccoon after all these years of saying he wasn't one, but, you know, seeing his fellow raccoons in that cage and seeing their kind of scientific, you know, biological name spelled out, he kind of reconciled with that fact. And it was just a beautiful moment, an incredible moment. And also the fact that, you know, during that rescue mission, whilst the Guardians were trying to save the children from the High Evolutionary ship, you know, Rocket was the one to decide to go back and save the animals. Again, trying to hammer home that message of anti-animal cruelty, because he, of course, related to them. He was them. It's a really touching moment where he, you know, takes on the name that he has in the comics, finally. And, you know, of all of the scenes that we have gotten where superheroes have gotten their name, right? They've been christened with their comic book name. I think this is definitely up there. And I also wanted to give a massive shout out to Sean Gunn and Bradley Cooper, because I feel like they don't get a lot of recognition, because, you know, Sean Gunn does the mocap for Rocket, and he's been doing this for all, you know, the films that Rocket has appeared in, and has been doing an amazing job. He's kind of like coming from the Andy Serkis school of mocap here. Like, let's give the guy credit where credit is due. And then you have Bradley Cooper, who everyone forgets, you know, voices Rocket. And he kind of disassociates himself from the franchise in general. I'm not the biggest Bradley Cooper fan because he's a bit, yeah. But it was nice to see him actually show up for press and stuff for this movie because it is focused on Rocket. And he does a really great job, you know, as this character, guys. Like, he kind of knocks it out of the park as well. I've always been a Rocket fan. Yes, I have. And I'm so happy he didn't die, by the way. Oh my god, I was convinced he was gonna die, although some of these scenes in the film were even worse. But at least he's alive in the end. At least he has a happily ever after. Okay, so next up we have the old leader of the Guardians, Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord. And I think this was also a really compelling storyline. At first it was annoying because he kept moping around being sad about Gamora not remembering him and their love story. But I really liked how the team kind of confronted him on this, especially Mantis and Nebula. Like, they were really honest with him, and you know, because they're a family, you know, they were able to really tell it to him straight. And I think it was really refreshing to see. I feel like if this was, you know, in the 80s, his behavior would have been encouraged until he finally got the girl and blah blah blah, but thankfully we've evolved. And Peter finally manages to see that he's never going to get his old Gamora back, but that's okay because this Gamora now exists and she's allowed to be an autonomous being that has brand new experiences. Yeah, in the end we see Peter head back to Earth, and it was really weird seeing him like just in a regular outfit with like a Jansport bag. Like, that was odd. I was like, that's not Star-Lord. But yeah, he manages to meet his grandfather and they're just, you know, chatting in the end. And I think that was, again, a really touching, you know, ending to Peter's story, considering the arc that he's had across all three of these films. And it also left just enough for us to be interested should they go ahead with the character of Peter Quill, which I honestly wouldn't mind, as long as it's not in like a solo movie. I feel like there's still something there to explore. And then next up we have Gamora, and this is like an alternate version of Gamora who came out of the Infinity War saga, and she's now part of the Ravagers, who are led by Sylvester Stallone. That's fun. I thought Zoe Saldana did such a brilliant job portraying this new version of Gamora, giving us just enough of the old Gamora that we still recognize the character and we remember what she was like in the first Guardians movie before she became a part of the Guardians team. But at the same time, she's different enough where you're like, oh, like this is someone who's gone down a completely different route. She's now a Ravager. She doesn't care about the Guardians the way that she used to in Volume 2. And so, yeah, you see what her fate would have been had she not become a part of the team. But it was also a great opportunity to allow us to fall in love with the Guardians through her eyes. Like, when she spent time with them as part of this mission to, you know, rescue Rocket, she was able to get to know them and see their kind of family shenanigans, and it kind of, you know, warmed her heart just a little bit, melted some of that ice. And so even though she doesn't, you know, become a part of the Guardians at the end, which I respected, I feel like she has a greater sense of family with the Ravagers, and she comes to appreciate, you know, her newfound family with them because of the connection that she sees with the Guardians. I thought that was such a lovely arc to give this character, because she still ends up with a found family. It's just not the one that we wanted her to end up with. And next we have Drax. I would say that if there was any of the Guardians that were a little bit underserved across the trilogy, it probably would be Drax. We get the majority of his backstory in the first Guardians movie, where we find out that Ronan the Accuser killed his wife and his daughter, and then he kind of becomes more of a laughing stock throughout the trilogy and all of his appearances elsewhere. But this time around, especially in the second half of the film, we do see, you know, him connect with these kids, the ones that were captured on the High Evolutionary ship, and we see that he has a value, you know, as part of the team team. We see that he's more than just a laughing stock, and we see that the team, you know, realizes this and they recognize this in him, and so, you know, he's charged of taking care of all the kids. It's so funny how Nebula is like, you're good with kids, you're gonna be their babysitter, like. But I thought it was a really nice gesture to kind of harken back to the fact that he was a father, the fact that he was able to make a connection with the kids and take care of them whilst they were escaping was just really nice. And like I said, the character needed something of substance, and I think James Gunn gave him that in his final, apparently, appearance. And next up we have, I think, one of the strongest character journeys in probably all of the MCU, actually, if you think about it. We have my good sis Nebula. I love Nebula, okay? I adore Karen Gillan's Nebula. To think of the journey that she's gone through from the first Guardians movie to now, I am so proud of my girl. I am so proud of my girl. I loved it when she was a part of the Guardians team. I was already happy. Now she's running things in nowhere. She's got such a good control of herself. She's got updates, but she also has like empathy and she cares about members of her team. Her reaction to finding out that Rocket wasn't dead, I was sobbing. That was the 17th time I started to cry. Nebula is just chef's kiss, top tier MCU character. I don't care what anyone says. There's always these big discussions about female representation in the MCU and the MCU and blah 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 blah. People like to act like women didn't exist in the MCU before She-Hulk came along, but may I direct you towards an excellent example of phenomenal female representation in Nebula. Because that is how you do it. Okay, she's a phenomenal character, and Karen Gillan's portrayal of her has always just been so iconic and so underappreciated. So I'm here to just spread the love, okay, because I am a huge Nebula fan. And then next up we have Mantis, and Mantis came along in volume 2. She was under Ego's thumb for the longest time before the Guardians saved her, and now she's just become again another treasured member of the Guardians team. Guys, like I think, you know, the holiday special also played a huge part in, you know, really increasing her role in the team and really fleshing out that character. So if you haven't watched the holiday special, be sure to fix that immediately. You really get to appreciate Mantis in that film, especially her connection to Peter once she, you know, realizes that he's her half brother. At the end of the film, you do see that she goes off to, you know, explore what she wants for herself, and that's obviously really bittersweet, but I do feel like it made sense for the character, because throughout the film you have her teammates being like, Mantis do this, Mantis do that, and you get the sense that, you know, they're not really listening to her all the time. Perhaps they underestimate her the way that everyone underestimates Drax, and so I think it made perfect sense that she would want to explore, you know, herself and what she wants for herself when she's not being commanded by Ego or even the Guardians. And then of course, how could we ever forget the one and only Groot? Groot says his first human English words. Guys, oh, stop this now. Guys, I also cried during that. I also cried when Groot said, what did he say? Like, I love you guys? Oh, stop this. Stop it. Like, what is this Toy Story 3 nonsense? I was literally in tears. Like, I love these guys so much. But yeah, the character of Groot is an icon. What can I say? Like, duh. The character of Groot is an icon. And honestly, even though I have no interest, zero interest in the Fast and Furious movies, I do think that Vin Diesel does have a place in Hollywood history for his voice performance for Groot. So I need to give credit where credit is due. Vin Diesel did that. Like, he actually did that though. I think his performance in this film was even better than in the previous films. Maybe I'm making it up, but I feel like he has the I am Groot down to pat now, where he was able to get the different inflections. I am Groot. Like, I think you're seeing what I'm seeing. You're hearing what I'm hearing for sure. But then you also have the side characters like Kraglin and our new friend Cosmo. Cosmo is so adorable. Cosmo is amazing. At first I thought it was a waste of Maria Bakalova because she's incredible, especially in that latest what's it, Sacha Baron Cohen movie. I can't remember what it was called now. Borat, that's it, Borat 2. She was so good. So I was like, why not give her like a live action role? But maybe James Gunn is saving her for DC because he, you know, if you have a relationship with James Gunn, you're working forever. Okay. So yeah, Maria may be transferring over into a live action role in DC, but her voice work here was also fantastic, and her storyline with Kraglin, you know, while silly, was still adorable, and it brought us back to nowhere to remind us that this is the Guardians' domain. So I think it was really effective. And also, let's not forget that the mere presence of Cosmo the dog also played into the anti-animal abuse theme, where Cosmo was of course the dog that the Russians sent over to space with no real plan of bringing her back. So yeah, that's highlighted in the film, and again it ties into, you know, animal experimentation, animal abuse, so the presence of that character does also thematically make sense as well. And then you have Kraglin, who's portrayed by Sean Gunn, James's brother, and again he did the mocap work for Rocket, but he also obviously had his own character. He was a former Ravager under Yondu, and now he's got the whistle thing that Yondu had with the mohawk and he was trying to figure out how to use it, and then he even gets his own scene where he's able to beat the bad guys with the little whistle dart thing. So yeah, like literally everyone gets a moment to shine in this film. It's absolutely fantastic. And finally, in terms of spotlighting individual characters, we also get the introduction of Adam Warlock as portrayed by Will Poulter, and here you have like a very, you know, stereotypical kind of hero character, physically speaking, like on the outside, but on the inside, he's a baby. On the inside, they've literally, you know, taken his age, which is what, less than a few years old, and given him that like mental state. So Elizabeth Debicki's Aisha is literally his mother, and he's a baby who doesn't understand the world and takes everything literally, almost like a Drax. I don't know how fans of Adam Warlock would respond to this depiction of him. Considering his comic book origins, I feel like they kind of missed the Adam Warlock train. Is it the Mr. Train, Mr. Journey, whatever? It's a bit too late, is my point. Okay, it's a bit too late for Adam Warlock because he's supposed to be a part of like the Infinity Gems saga. So yeah, I feel like his inclusion here was a little bit. I could have taken it or left it. I didn't hate Will Poulter's portrayal of him at all. I thought it was really funny. He had like a Australian accent or something. That was fun. But yeah, I don't think he was like essential to the story. And I don't know if you're like an Adam Warlock fan. I don't know if you'd be happy with his portrayal or if it's like comic book accurate. But again, it did make sense narratively because here the High Evolutionary was the creator of the sovereign species. It's one of his many species that he created, and so it makes sense that he would send Adam Warlock to fetch his prized possession, Rocket. Okay, so finally, now that we've talked about the scripts and the characters and the music and everything, the entire Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, I guess all that's left to say is I think that this was a very well produced film overall. I feel like the VFX was so strong in this film, especially for the animals. Like, keep in mind, they have to do every single strand of hair on these animals, and it just looks so photorealistic and excellent. But even the action set pieces were really well carried out. I felt like the production design was so strong. I mean, you know, in contrast to Quantumania, which had to create the quantum realm, and it just felt like the volume. It felt like a screensaver on the volume. Here, the worlds actually feel three-dimensional, and the characters feel like they're interacting with these worlds around them. And also, there's such a variety in the designs. They're all very distinct and beautiful, disgusting, horrible, eye-catching to look at. Like, it's just so well done. And again, I think it speaks to the difference between having a director who has no real creative vision like Peyton Reed, and one that does, like James Gunn. And we also get some really great action sequences in this movie. In particular, the one with all of the Guardians when they've saved Rocket and they're in that hallway, like fighting off the bad guys together as a team. Oh, that extended sequence was mwah. Like, that's exactly what we need in the final installment of this version of the Guardians' story. It was just perfection. Okay, absolutely perfect. So guys, the end is here. Oh! The end of the Guardians of the Galaxy as we knew them, the end of James Gunn's run in the MCU, and the end of this review. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 a 9 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!